Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to part 2 on the build of these two paludariums behind me. So we're going to be finishing off our ventilation, running our pumps, running our low density poly and doing a drip test, and I'm going to show you guys exactly how I do that, and our end result is going to end up the same as these two finished paludariums behind me. So stick around. My name's Dean and you're watching Vivscape. Alrighty guys, so here we have our tank laying on its belly. Now the reason why I have it on its belly is because I did forget to drill the drainage hole. So here we have our hole for the cord for the pump, and this is our drainage hole. Now I've drilled it 260 from the bottom up, keeping in mind that our substrate dam is 300 tall. So it gives us about a 40 mil buffer zone. Now I do that for a reason, because when the misting system is coming on and the water is slowly rising up, we don't want that water to overflow over the vent where the door is and flood the garage. So that 40 mil just gives us that or a chance to catch that before it does overflow. Now the bulkhead that we use is a 1/4 inch bulkhead, which is the same as that we use for our misting systems. And because that hole is so small, it doesn't take very much for it to block up. So that 40 mil just gives us that better chance of catching that before that happens. So that's the reason why I do that. I have taped underneath the hole so that when we drill our glass, the plug or the glass plug, when it falls out, doesn't drop down and shatter the substrate dam. Now, one thing I like to use when I am drilling glass is one of these. Now, some of you might know what these are. It is just a bit of plastic that is generally in the back of a pot when you buy a creeping plant. These are normally there, and the plant is tied to this to get it started. I use these. I use a large hole, and that is my well of water. So I sit that down here. I put a little bit of car polish around the outside here. And the reason why I do that is when you put it right here, in the middle of where we're going to drill our hole, it creates a suction, and then when we fill this up with water, we don't have water just spreading everywhere. It stays in that one spot, keeping our diamond tip blade nice and cool, so that way we don't have a chance of cracking the glass. Okay, so here we have our drill. I've got on the drill setting, as you can see. Don't have it on hammer drill, because as soon as you start drilling, you're just going to shatter the glass straight away. I've got it on speed 2. Now you don't want to have this flat out, sort of keep it sort of medium revs as best as possible. And here is our diamond tip blade. Now generally used for cutting masonry, like tiles and stuff like that, but is also used for cutting glass. This is an 18 mil, it's quite blunt. It has pretty much drilled all my tanks to date. So it does take me a bit longer than normal, but it should take you roughly 5 minutes to drill through 7 mil glass. So that's the one right there. Alright, so what you want to do when you start drilling is you want to support the drill as best as possible in the exact spot where you want to start drilling on an angle. So you're going to allow the drill bit to bite into the glass first, so that you have the drill in the exact spot where you want it. And then as you're drilling, slowly rotate the drill bit or the drill until it is dead straight up and down. Now the reason why we do that is because if you start the drill straight up and down, it's going to want to walk all around the glass, therefore scratching your glass and marking it, and your hole's not going to be in the exact spot where you want it. So yeah, slowly starting on an angle and then slowly rotating. Now you don't want to put pressure on the drill when you're cutting the glass. You want to leave the weight of the drill and the diamond tip blade to do all the work. With a nice steady pace, it shouldn't take too long. Drilled through. As you can see, a bit of glass is moving. I'll try and pull that out. It's not going to happen. So yeah, we'll flip this tank up. We'll clean up the back. We'll clean up the inside. So here is the tank. It's finally standing up now. We've finished cutting our hole. So I've just finished cleaning up all the water and all the residue from cutting that hole. And I'll show you the hole right now. So it's that one right there. And I normally push the bulkhead in from this side, from the inside first. And I'll show you that bulkhead. And this is the one right here. So this is a 1/4 inch bulkhead. I normally push this from the inside, like I mentioned. I run a bead of silicone around that lip. And then I run another bead of silicone on the back side of the tank. And then I fasten up that wing nut. Now that's the inside. So it's not a very big hole, like I mentioned. It doesn't take much to block these up. Now these are the same bulkheads that I use when I drill the top of the tanks, which is that one right there. So I just plug my misting nozzles into these, and yeah, this makes it a lot easier. Less chance of any animals escaping. So we're going to now move on to the vent at the top of the tank. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by measuring all 4 corners, or all 4 edges, I should say. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cut our white L-shaped plastic once again. This is the same size that we used at the door for that vent. Now what we're going to do is we're going to end up gluing these in place like so. So what we're going to do is have this L piece, or the bit at the bottom here, get that in frame. That piece there will be on the bottom, and then this piece will be the bit that we glue to the glass. So it's going to sit in like so. Now we're going to cut all 4, and then we're going to 45 the ends, just so that it gives it a picture frame kind of look. And then that way we can glue in our flyscreen mesh. Now, once this is glued in and it's leveled to the bottom of the glass, it's going to stick up about that much. So I do end up cutting the excess bit of plastic off the top. You don't necessarily need to, because once it's up on the stand, you can't see it anyway. But I just like to do it just because I'm a little bit fussy. So I try and make them look as neat and nice as possible. And I'll show you guys exactly how I do that. But for now, let's measure these, let's cut them, we'll glue them into place, and then we'll move on to that stage. Alrighty, so here we have all the tools that we need to complete this job. So the first thing obviously being our white bit of plastic that we're using. Then we got our cutting block here. Now the cutting block works really well. You push your plastic up hard against one side, obviously you have your plastic marked, and then you can cut your 45s. So that's a really good handy tool to have, just to make sure that you've got your cuts in the correct angle. Now I use a hacksaw to cut the plastic, and it's a very fine blade. You don't want anything that's too coarse, otherwise it's going to crack or wreck the plastic. So I like to use a hacksaw just to cut that, and it does work. That works pretty well. So, and then I use obviously a little Sharpie texture just to mark the plastic. Obviously our tape measure. Now I use a little bit of 100 grit sandpaper just to rough the edge of the plastic where we're gluing that to the glass, just so the silicone has something to adhere to better. And then obviously our silicone and silicone gun. Now the silicone that I use is obviously Sealy's 100% silicone. It is for glass. And then obviously just a rag handy, especially when you're cleaning up and smearing the silicone. So we don't want to make too much of a mess. So that's it. Let's start measuring, and then let's start cutting this. So as you saw, we've cut all our plastic now. As you can see, it's all here. So with this one, will just fit into place like so. And then this one here will just sit in there, if I can get it right. And then it slides in like so. As you can see, that nice 45. It's just cut nicely. And then it just makes it a nicer look from the bottom. Looks nice and neat and tidy, and that's all the way around. So we'll get this silicone in place. We'll wait for it to dry for a bit, and then we'll measure, cut our fly screen, glue that into place, and then we will move on to the next step. Alrighty guys, one thing before we start gluing everything into place, we want to make sure that we rough up the edge of the plastic that we're going to glue to the glass with our sandpaper. So I just like to quickly scuff up that side. It doesn't take too much, a couple of rubs over the whole plastic, because the sandpaper is quite coarse. With soft plastic, it doesn't take very long. So I only do this, it's probably not necessary. I just do it just because I want to make sure that we're not going to have any problems down the track. And then plus the reason why I'm having this vent is because I am going to be running UV lights on these tanks for the tree frogs. So I want to make sure that that light isn't too heavy where it collapses the fly screen through the roof of the tank, damage the enclosure, obviously injure or kill the frogs, or even have them escape. So it's just a little bit of reassurance for myself, just to make sure that we're going to have 100% adhesion from the silicone to the plastic to the glass. So yeah, and then after that, you want to make sure that you wipe down all your plastic. You want to wipe down all the glass so there is no oily residue from your skin, or any dust that you've been sanding like I am over the top of the tank. But yeah, just want to make sure everything's clean, and then you're ready to start siliconing everything in place. Alrighty guys, so now we've glued that into place. We're going to cut the excess off the top here, all the way around. And the way I do that is with a hot glue gun with a little blade. Now it's like an X-Acto blade knife, but obviously it heats up. So it slightly softens the plastic, and it cuts through quite easy. So we'll go around and quickly do that, and then we'll cut our fly screen and glue that into place, and then move on to the next step. Alrighty, so now that the Stanley knife has heated up, we're going to start cutting. It is a little bit of a slower process, but with a little bit of patience, it doesn't take too long. So all I do is I simply get down to the glass, and then I just slowly run it along that glass edge. Now the ideal thing would be to get some plastic that's already to the thickness, but unfortunately we don't have that here. So I just go for this method, which doesn't really take too long. As you can see, we're getting through this pretty easy. So obviously the hotter the blade gets, the easier it gets to cut. And there you go, simple as that. So we'll quickly tidy that up a little bit, and then we'll move on, and then we'll continue cutting all these other spots. There are a couple of little high spots here and there. We'll quickly clean those up, and then we'll come back to it. Alrighty guys, so now that we've completed that, we are now onto the stage of gluing the fly screen into place. So I went ahead and quickly cut that, so I didn't bore you guys to tears. Now what you want to make sure is that you don't cut the fly screen to the exact width or length of the spot where you're going to be putting your fly screen in. You want to make sure that it's overlapping the spot where you're going to glue it. But you want to make sure that you've got a little bit of play so you can really stretch this and get this nice and tight. So what I do is I run a bead of silicone around the outside. I'm just using the Sealy's glass silicone, like so. And then I use a cotton bud, like that one. And then I work this into place. I then stretch the fly screen as much as I can, move the silicone around so that we know that this is, the fly screen is under the silicone. And then I allow this to dry for roughly an hour or so until the silicone is dry to the touch. I then run another bead of silicone over the top of this and then smear it out just to make sure that all the fly screen is 100% under the silicone and that we don't have any chance of any frogs from underneath pushing this fly screen up. So we're going to go ahead and glue this into place, and then we'll move on to the next stage. Alrighty guys, so the silicone is now dry to the touch. It's all done. So now we're going to run our next bead of silicone around the outside on the top, and then I'm going to use this to smear it out. So this is a little silicone smearing tool. Obviously you've got like a square edge, you've got a number 5 and you've got a number 3, and then obviously that just gives you a nice nice even spread with the silicone, and then because it is rubber it's quite flexible. So I'm just going to use the number 3, which is that one right there. The reason why I want to use this is just to make sure that we got a nice edge all the way around the fly screen to stop any of the corners from peeling up, because we don't want any frogs getting in from underneath. So just that extra bit of silicone around the top of the fly screen is just going to ensure that that's not going to lift up at all. Alrighty, so now we're at the stage of finishing off the ventilation for the front door. So I've gone ahead and cut my fly screen. So that'll fit in like so. And generally what I'll do is I'll run a bead of silicone right around the glass here, place that down. Then I'll go ahead and get my little piece of aluminium, and that will just sit on top of the fly screen like that. And then we will put our tracking in on top of that bit of aluminium. And then we've got our little L-shaped angle line that sits on the back, just to cap that bit of glass off at the back so it's not so sharp for the animals. And then that's pretty much how you construct the front door. So we'll go ahead and glue that in, and then we'll move on to wiring up and setting up the pump. So now we're up to the stage of doing the drip system, and we're going to start off by running the pump. So this is the pump that I use. It is an Aqua Pro. It's an extra small pump, and then it does up to 20 to 60 centimeters in height for water features. But for what we're using, because we're only using 13 mil low density poly with tiny little holes, it builds up just enough pressure for it to pump right up to the top where it dribbles out, which is what we need. We don't want it completely squirting out to the point where it's hitting the front of the tank, otherwise then we won't get our drip effect. But once we do the water test, you will see that it does spray out a bit, but not to the point where it's coming over the vent at the door. So that is the pump. And this is the actual pump. So the barb on the top here is a 13 mil. So the pipe that we're going to be using fits over that just nicely. It has a flow valve on the top, or on the side, sorry. And I have that all the way up on the plus. And then we're going to cut this cord, thread that through the hole in the back of the tank, and then we're going to reconnect the plug. Now what you want to do is you want to make sure that you are buying a separate plug, like this one right here, so that you can rewire it, and it has all the instructions inside so that you know how to wire it correctly. So now we're at the stage of running our low density poly. Now the pump's in, cord's run, and the plug has been reconnected. So now we'll run our low density poly, and this is the low density poly right here. It's 13 mil. Same kind of stuff we use for in our gardens for watering. Now there's an elbow on the end there, and then a end connector. And all I did was I measured the overall length of this so that it would fit nice and tight in the top of the tank. So now we're going to connect all this. We will have to put a little joiner in the upright from the pump to the top because the lengths aren't long enough to reach the very top. So we'll put a little joiner in, and then we will put the holes through the drip bar, evenly spaced. Doesn't matter how many you put in. It just depends on how much water you want to drip down the back of the tank, and then keeping in mind like where you want your hardscape, because you want some of this water sort of dripping down off bits of wood or rock and stuff like that as well. It just adds an extra feature, gives it a nicer look as well, but it's also functionality is really good for growing moss, and plus the frogs enjoy it as well. Alrighty guys. So now we've got our pipes here. We're going to start connecting them all. I will have to join a small piece between this and the pump with a joiner. So we'll quickly get that done. We'll plug it all in. We'll quickly put our holes in the pipe, and I'll show you what I use to put the holes in. And then we will fill this up with water, and then we'll do a water test and see how it's all running. Make sure there's no leaks. Make sure everything's running okay before we end up doing all that expander foam and stuff like that. So let's start plugging this in and we'll get done. So these are all pretty easy to do. They just push in. I don't use any clamps because there's not a lot of pressure there. So all I do is put that in here like this, and that sits up there like so. Now I make sure that that's nice and tight so it sits up there correctly, so that when we expand the foam, that all sits in there in place like it should. So I will finish this off, get this all plugged in, and then we'll put the holes in. So now the piping is all in, all the way up to the very top. I've got a little bit of tape off to the right there, just holding that water drip bar in place. And then it goes into an elbow, and then it goes all the way down to the pump. And there is a little joiner right there, and then down into the pump. Now the thing that I use to pop the holes in the pipe is this little guy here. It's a sharp little point. It is a light meter to test for electrical current, and I just use this because it is quite sharp. And I'll push it all the way to the very end down here, and it gives me a good drip pace. Alright, so we're going to start putting these holes in. Now, you want to sort of evenly space them out. Now, keeping in mind that when the barb for the joiner or the end cap does come past a little bit, so there's a bit of a swelling there where the barb is on the actual end of the joiner. So you want to come out just a little bit. And then just evenly space them out to what you think or how you feel your layout's going to be. I normally just pop holes evenly across. If they're something that you don't want, or like if the hole's in the wrong spot, we can simply block those up, and then you can pop more holes in where you want the water to be diverted. So we're just going to go ahead and pop those holes in. So that's one. There probably is a better way to do this, but this is just the way I do it. It doesn't take too long, so. One thing also you want to make sure is you don't want to put them too high up, otherwise the water's just going to squirt straight up and hit the roof of the tank. So I like to sort of either put them dead center middle or slightly down. And one more. That's it. So there we are. Both tanks are now up and running. They're both at the same stage. Now we've had no leaks so far. Pumps are running correctly. As you can see, the water running out of both tanks. This is the tank that we just complete, this one here. Now that seems like a lot of water running out. But like I mentioned before, once we do our expander foam, we put all our hardscape in, like rocks and wood. It definitely will slow down the drip pace. And then obviously once we do plants and put some moss over the top of those holes as well, it'll slow it down again, and it'll pretty much be the same as the tanks that I've done before these. But yeah, I'm liking how everything's running. Now these two tanks are pretty much ready to start putting our hardscape in and then expander foaming, which is the funnest part of the builds. Seeing the vision come to life. So you can see there's only a small amount of water in the bottom. Alrighty guys, so that's it from me today. I'd like to say thanks so much for tuning in. So now these two tanks behind me, they're pretty much complete. So we've finished our ventilation, we've installed our pumps, and we've done our water test. So now on the next episodes, we're going to be looking at doing our hardscape, so gluing in all our rock and wood. We'll also be expander foaming, carving the expanding foam, and then also be covering the expanding foam with our core peat and our aqua soil. So if you don't want to miss any of that, please hit that notification bell. Please like and subscribe to the channel. I'll also have an Instagram and a Facebook page. It is viv_scape. So please go give that a like also. So once again, thanks for watching Vivscape.